Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I love reading John Maxwell books. John Maxwell, his books are really the books that kicked me off to reading. I went to law school. I did a lot of reading. Not that I totally swore it off, but it's just like at some point you're like, But you read a John Maxwell book and it's like it kind of pulls you in, and he has lots of references to other books, and that's just kind of been like pulling on a thread. It's just one thing leads to the other. So I love John Maxwell. One of the stories I really appreciated about John Maxwell, he shared the story, and I can't remember which book, shame on me, but he's got a lot of great books. But at any rate, he shares a story about a church pastor who is leaving one church and going to another. And it's not like cross town, but 3 states away, and talks about the church pastor being really happy about leaving Church X and going to Church Y, because in Church X, there was a board member that was, let's politely say, a handful. And as many great people as there were, this guy was a handful. And he's like, I just can't wait to get to the new church and just have this handful behind me. The new pastor can deal with Mr. Handful. And so this particular pastor goes to Church Y and quickly discovers that there's a different name and it's a different face, but he's got a new handful in this new Mr. Handful in this new church. And it really kind of underscores the point that we're going to have these sorts of people in our lives. And that's the point he went on to make, is, you have to learn to deal with these sorts of people. Today I have on with me John D. Hansen. He's a LinkedIn business coach. He's the author of Winning Secrets: How a Dictionary and a Ruler Can Change Your Life. If you're a listener of this, consistent listener, you know that he's been on before. But he sent me a couple articles. Well, he has a whole distribution he sends out, his weekly Winning Secret. And he had a couple that came out back in January called Beware the Poison. There was a 2-parter talking about toxic people. And I emailed him right away. I've been on his program and he's been on mine, and we've known each other for a while. I told him, I said, I'm going to do a podcast on that. And I've looked at it, and I've always just pushed it aside and say, I'll do it another day. And then I realized the reason why is because I just needed to get John on here. I just needed to get John on here to talk about it. Rather than me sharing what he said. Let's hear it from the expert, from the author, straight away. John, welcome back.
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be back on the show, and I always enjoy our conversations. The time flies,
Yeah, no, it does. It does. The second you got on LinkedIn or got on Zoom with me, I should hit record, because it would have sounded funny, but there's certainly value there. Well, you heard the lead in, toxic relationships.
Yeah.
I can think, I can't think of a time in my life when there wasn't one. Bullying relationships in junior high, that's a toxic relationship. Yep. It's, and I guess depending upon how you define things, there right. are people in my life who were toxic and then not toxic for whatever reason, or people who were decent and then became toxic yeah. for yeah. whatever reason. So it's a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, like you said, in different phases of our life, sometimes we're in leadership roles. Sometimes we're in an employee role. Sometimes yeah. it's a close relative, which makes it really difficult. So what do you do in that situation? How do you navigate that? And I think the first thing that I had to realize was I had to do a lot of self-work first. I had a good number of these in my life that I was kind of allowing to affect me when I was younger. And I don't think that's uncommon. But then I realized that some of those self-limiting beliefs that I had were due to those toxic relationships that I carried well into adulthood. Yeah. And so I think that the first piece is self-work. And not, I used to think self-work or self-care was selfish because the word self is in it. Yeah. But that was such a limited mindset, because when I realized just a few years ago, and become one of my top workshops when I realized that self-care is the most loving thing you can do for others. Because if you're not doing self-work, if you're not pouring intentionally into yourself, then people are automatically not getting the best version of you. That's where I realized that why self-work is so important. You mentioned John Maxwell, and he's got some great stuff on this. So I was curious, I've got stories for all three, but I was curious if you thought the greatest value to the people that regularly listen would be within the workplace. If that would be a helpful place to start with, and we have a little more time, we can go into others, but maybe toxic relationships in the workplace. Is that what you were thinking would be a good place to start?
Well, I mean, certainly, you never really know with podcasting who your audience is, which is fine. It's a blessing and it's a curse. I think relationships are relationships.
Gotcha.
So I don't know that, and anymore, you can attest to this, is when does your day start and when does your day end? And
Oh,
when is your
true.
professional day? I mean, it's, you're up at 5 a.m. and you've got that, fire you need to put out on an email, and they say don't check your email first thing. I don't subscribe to that. If I'm going to be driving cross state or cross town, I need to know whether the meeting's happening or not, right? So I'm
Yep.
going to check. But anyhow, yeah, let's focus on business, entrepreneur related. But just I want everybody to realize that I don't want you to listen and say, well, that's not happening to me in business. You know what? That applies at home too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would start with the one that's going to make the most sense, right? It's the one that's going to apply. The principles that I'll share are going to apply across the board, whether it's a close relative, whether it's a friend, a
Yeah.
neighbor who doesn't
Yeah.
have experience with a toxic neighbor. So what I'm going to share will apply across the board, even though it's going to be, the story will be from a business perspective, a business context. The principles still apply no matter where you encounter this toxic relationship, this toxic individual. And you're right. You mentioned this at the beginning. You said sometimes it can change. Sometimes people can start off being that way because of how they were raised, their background, their environment.
Yeah.
Then they change environments, and all of a sudden, what was stuck to them no longer is, and they're a different person in a
Or
wonderful way.
yeah, or they just become self-aware.
Yeah,
It's like I
right,
didn't realize people saw me that way.
right.
I was
And
just
someone
acting.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
someone was loving enough to tell them
Yeah, I was just
directly
acting like
enough.
my dad, or I mean, we've
Right.
gone through different eras in business where,
Yep.
um, there was the beatings will stop when the morale improves era, right? I mean, it's and that just
Yeah.
doesn't fly anymore.
No,
I don't know that
no,
it
and it
ever
shouldn't.
did.
No,
No,
no, I don't think
but
it worked. I just think that was commonly accepted, but no, it doesn't work. Neither is the other extremes don't work.
yeah,
So what's a healthy medium ground? And so a company that I worked with a few years ago, they were in B2B sales, and they had covered about 2/3 of a state, and they've been doing it for almost 50 years at that point. They were well established. They were in three metro areas. They were well established in one. And when I was brought in, the goal was to help grow the company, and started off tremendously well, uh, with a combined focus of upgrading their marketing and their website, and their online presence and all those things, LinkedIn, and leveraging that tool, all those things that I brought to bear tremendously improved. Like in the city they were headquartered in, you can easily find them. But if a business, their hair is on fire, not literally, but figuratively, they're
hmm
not going to go to page 10 of Google to find your solution.
right,
So of their 10 core product solutions, they were well represented in one, but the other two cities, it was like they didn't even exist, and they'd been in those markets just as long. Well, in less than a year, I was able to turn things around, and they were tremendously easily found, and was a combination of things. But what happened after, I'd say about a year or so, is where you really start to get to know an organization. And that's where I started noticing things that were significantly concerning to me, because it had everything to do with culture. You can have the right solutions and they can work for a period of time. But if you don't address toxic or relationships that could potentially become toxic. See, what you're trying to do is identify what could become a major issue before it does become a major issue. Sometimes you unearth it and it already was, and it's been there for a while. It's just been swept under the rug. Other times it's something that's developing, and it can be kind of headed off if you have a way to address that. Well, as much as I brought it up directly, saying you've got a senior leader that is not acting professionally both inside and outside the organization, and that wasn't heard, because the person that referred that was a long-standing, high tenured person in leadership in that company. And so they kept that person on far too long, where they lost promising young people inside, they lost clients outside. And until the person didn't leave until the writing was on the wall that they were going to get fired. That's where toxic relationships can absolutely undermine. It's not just do people like coming to work or not. It affects retention inside and outside.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you're a team member and you don't have any say in that matter? That's where you do the very best job you can with the ones you're responsible for, whether it's accounts, whether it's team members. You've got to be, I think, even more intentionally pouring into the people around you so that you're a source of encouragement for them. If you know that's happening and you can't change that, the serenity prayer, right?
Yep.
Give me the wisdom to understand the difference between the things I can control and the things I can't control.
Right.
Well, sometimes you're not going to be able to control this. You're not going to have an impact on whether that toxic person stays or goes. And certainly a board member, in your example, a pastor is not going to have say in that way. So how do you navigate that? And that's where I think when we started off talking about self-care, because you're going to need to be pouring into others, you got to be pouring into yourself even more. So that I picture it like a fountain, Frank. The smallest bowl is at the very top. But if
Right.
that little bowl doesn't overflow, then the successively larger bowls don't get filled up and overflow into the base to get pumped back to the top again. And that's where we've got to be intentional about pouring into ourselves, becoming more self-aware, doing self-work so that people are getting the best version of ourselves. And that's what will enable you to both work through those times, whether you stay or go somewhere else. But more importantly, you'll be able to pour into the ones that every experience they have with you, inside or outside the company, is always with excellence. And that will give them encouragement. It may help people stick around longer that are valued team members and certainly clients. If you earn their trust, then you can help work through those situations, even if that person or those people are outside of your sphere of influence or, decision-making abilities.
Yeah. No. There's a ton to unpack there.
Mhm.
The whole notion that you have that toxic person, what happens to the other people?
Yeah.
In looking at it, the good people
Right.
who have options will leave.
Especially today, because
Yep.
there are so many options out
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Yes.
They will
Yes.
leave.
Yep.
And I think what ends up happening is it really kind of takes down the average of the company.
It
The
does.
average, the quality just goes down. Because the
Yeah.
company's looking and saying, we're going to get rid of the people on the low end. Well, the people on the
Right.
top end, they're going to leave because it's like, I don't want to deal with this. And so you're stuck with you're
Yes.
moving towards mediocrity, right? I
Yes.
mean, it's just
Yes.
in theory, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you see
It's
it
true.
time and again.
Yes, and not just in for-profit. This happens in nonprofits. It happens in churches too.
Yeah,
Of your example of the story that John Maxwell gave, like that's true in those circumstances
yeah,
too. And it's something where you've got to be, as an organization, you've got to be addressing it, because if you don't, then the long-term repercussions of that is that you're not only going to lose people and they won't come back, but they'll be like especially the ones that leave quietly.
yeah,
Once they're outside, they're not quiet anymore. So if you've got one person that's being vocal about what they're concerned about, you've got on average about 9 other people, and they're just as concerned. You can't afford to have that kind of a potential impact on your
right.
business or your nonprofit or your church nowadays, knowing that if one person's concerned, there are plenty others who are as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think at the root of it, the problem was, if I really boil it down to one thing, it was misplaced loyalty. It was, this person's been with us for so long, or the person who recommended this person has been with us for so long, that we need to give them more space because
yeah,
they're so valued, because of their longevity, because of their experience, because of their knowledge, because of who recommended them. And that's like, but I liken it to, and I know it seems harsh, but you've really got to see it this way. If you're a leader, okay, how many drops of poison are enough to make the water undrinkable? Well, not that many. But it's just not that big of a deal. It is that big of a deal because it affects the entire glass of water. It's not an isolated incident, and usually it's not. Usually there's multiple things that kind of are discovered as time goes on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were alluding to earlier. This is in businesses, this is in churches, this is in
Yeah.
community organizations. You see it on professional sports teams.
Oh, for sure.
This
Yeah.
guy's this guy. Well, I say guy. We do have women's sports as well. But you get the hyper producer, the person. Well, the star salesperson, the star
Yep.
receiver, the star back, the star point guard, the star whatever,
Yeah.
and they get a little more latitude, and they act like it. They
Yeah.
might get visited by the ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, right? And then turn themselves around. Um, but in the moment when they're really full of themselves.
Yeah. And I would say this, I would say if you are in a leadership position and you're working on what you know is an issue, but it's not going to come easily, it's not going to be a quick fix.
Yeah.
I would do what's counterintuitive. You know how the saying that the squeaky wheel gets the grease? What I would do is I would even more intentionally grease the other three wheels. Meaning if you've got people who are bought in, who are contributing, who aren't causing issues. See, what we often do is fight fires. And if you're in leadership role and you have identified someone who is, and you're working on that, but it's going to be a complicated solution, however it works its way out, however you have to make decisions, realize that there's a whole pack of people that are bought in, that believe in this organization.
Yeah.
You need to be calling them in and supporting them, encouraging them, pointing out what they're doing well. Not at the quarterly reviews or the annual reviews when you're supposed to. I mean, at random, out of the blue, call them and do this. I call it flip the script, Frank. I talked about this at the national summit I just came from a few weeks ago. I said, flip the script. Call and say, hey, John, I need to talk to you in my office for a minute. What is the thing that just crossed your mind, Frank? It wasn't like, I'm getting a raise. That's not what goes through our mind. And that's certainly not what hits us in the pit of the stomach. So we're, kind of dragging ourselves into the office and the boss is sitting across the table there and you're just waiting to get the hammer, right? And whether it's a complaint or a write-up or something.
Yep.
And then that boss says, Mr. Smith says every time he works with you, he gets what he needs, when he needs it, with the quality he expects. And I wanted to say thank you because that means a lot to our business. Is there anything that we could do that could help you to do that even more? And then you just shut up and you listen to it. Now they're going to take a minute or two from the shock to wear off, to not realize, wait a minute, I'm not getting fired, or I'm not getting written up.
Yeah.
No. I wanted to tell you the great job you're doing and connect it to something tangible, right? And then ask for their feedback. But if you're going to ask for feedback, you better do something with it. Because if you don't do anything with it, then they realize it's just a show. So if you ask for feedback, you got to close the loop and you got to come back to them with, I might not be able to do this, but give me your feedback and I'll see what I can implement, or at least we can explore together. That people know they're being heard. They know they're making a difference in that case. So that's how you, while you're addressing a difficult issue, that's how you can help kind of shore up the larger group that isn't toxic. And that's even more important than addressing the issue.
And there, thinking as you talk, I'm thinking back to my tenure in public accounting, and you have people there who are Mr. Handful, right? And they can be belittling, and you're kind of questioning yourself. But I do remember that there were other leader figures who were like, don't worry about it. And really what they were saying is I don't have power to deal with it, but I recognize it, and you're okay. You're okay. And for me, that was, it's kind of you go home with a kind of a sigh of relief. I mean, that person's going to be there tomorrow and they're going to be after, but you start to realize that it's not me.
Right.
It's not me, and that's part of the self-work you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, it's not me, it's them. Okay. Why? Maybe I can't fix it. Right. Maybe, maybe they're worried about, maybe it's something on the home front. Maybe they're worried about getting promoted, or worried about getting fired, or their numbers, or whatever.
Right.
Or just maybe some people are like that. Some people, they just, there are people who are sociopaths. They just are, and I'm not saying that's what those people are, but it's just people are broken in lots of different ways.
It reminds me of that old saying, right? That hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And that can often be true. Actually, where I learned, Frank, the best way to address this personally, when I'm faced with a person that is or could be toxic, is from my days in a contact center. It wasn't a job by choice. I got downsized. But in that time frame, I was training new hires in 90 days because my soft skills were so good, and they measured it. So I could say that measure with any depth of certainty. I knew I was good at this, but that's where I learned. I'd get, I don't know how many calls a day, and almost all of them were problems, issues,
Yeah.
most of which I could solve and some I couldn't. But all of those people calling in didn't have a problem with me. I was there to help them solve their
Yeah.
problem, right? But that almost every conversation that started off with an issue, people were upset. Well, they weren't upset with me. And that only lasted about 6 months, thank goodness. But in that 6 month time frame, that's why I learned just kind of became a habit of learning not to take someone else's stress, their stressful response, their issue, and take it personally. I called it Teflon. I had to be like a nonstick pan, where I just had to realize it didn't have anything to do with me. And the
Yeah.
faster, and it was split seconds, the faster I could shed that off and really get to the issue. How can I help you? Because I was measured by that. I had to resolve their issue the first time they called as fast as possible while still giving them excellent care. How do you do that? Well, you figure it out over
Yeah.
time. And if you've got the chance to do that at the workplace, just realize just think of yourself as a nonstick pan. If you didn't start this, if it didn't have anything to do with you, and that's how you're being treated, realize that it's coming from them and it doesn't stick to you. Now, that doesn't mean that you're like, I don't need this, but you don't want to make the issue larger. On the other hand, you just need to realize internally, need to prepare for that fact that if this is how this person acts regularly, that it doesn't have anything to do with you.
Yeah.
And that understanding can help you kind of get around what could be offensive and really look at the root of the issue and not take it personally. So you're not carrying that baggage with you.
Yeah. I think asking a question akin to, what would be the resolution you would like to have today? Okay, that's a call center question. It's probably framed a little differently when you have that toxic boss or that toxic coworker. You know, I
Right.
really sense that I'm upsetting you somehow. What could I do to change that? And if they stumble on, if they can come up with something definitive that you can get your hands around, your
Yeah.
head around, then you know it's,
Yes.
I want to say it's you, but at least there's something you can address. But if
Yeah.
they just start stammering and, well, you're just so stupid, that's, yeah, you know the person. Then you know it's on them, right?
Exactly. It reminds me of Chris Voss. They never split the difference in
Yeah,
negotiation. He said one of the ways that you de-escalate is you put the question back on them. They're like, I want this and I want this, and they're so demanding, and lives are literally at stake. And you say, well, how am I supposed to do that with what I'm responsible for and what I've been said? How are we supposed to achieve that? Now it puts the ball back in their court where they have to provide an answer to you.
yeah,
And so asking well-worded questions actually is how you have control, self-control, and they're able to control a conversation in a positive way simply by what you ask and how you ask it, how you frame the question. It puts that, like you said, back in their court where they can either give you something specific to work with, or very clearly it's nothing to do with you. They're having
yeah,
another bad day. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and it's
Yeah.
at some point they realize that, and then if they're anybody, I mean, if that's just who they are, that's who they're going to be tomorrow.
Mhm.
There's nothing you can do to fix that. But if they're somewhat self-aware, they're going to realize that, oh, you know what? Yeah, that I messed up. I messed
And
up.
that's where, if you start asking well-worded questions like that sincerely, you'll find that the people that have that tendency toward toxicity, they don't react that way to you. They will react to others who react to them, because that reaction kind of feeds itself.
Yeah,
It's like yeast in a loaf of bread, like it just feeds off itself. Where if you're the one that's de-escalating and diffusing a situation by calmly worded questions that show that you're genuinely concerned about, is there something I can change that could help you? And if not, they'll actually, I've seen that soften as I work with people who work towards others. I would de-escalate those situations because I'm just really good at making peace with people that could be. Now, I couldn't do that all the time. There were some people that would not be. How many
yeah,
calls I got, right? There's some people that are just not going to be, but that was like one or two out of 100.
yeah,
Most. And one of my best stories was I converted someone that just started off flaming angry and became a raving fan, or out of the hundreds of people I served, This was the only client that sent me a hand-signed Christmas card. I worked at a Fortune 10 facility with thousands of employees. This person got to me, made sure it got to me, a personalized signed Christmas card. Only person ever did that of 100 people, hundreds
Wow.
of people I served in 2 years. The only one who did that. And they started off being so ticked off, and I was able to convert them to a raving fan. So it's how you work through those situations.
Yeah, I totally hear you. Let's switch gears here. Before we hit record, you're really focused on your one thing. If you want to, I guess, share with the audience your one thing that you're really working on, the value you're bringing to the business community, and certainly how we can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so the one thing was asked a week before I had a TED Talk to a conference, of a national conference, about 800 people. The video group that was capturing all that video and plenty more at the event asked me what my one thing was. And I thought, well, I'm going to be talking about my book. And he said, no, what's the one thing you do better than anybody else that also has a clear call to action connected to it? I thought, well, I don't have that, so I better. And that's where, after a little bit of reflection, I realized that LinkedIn is my one thing. It's 7 years ago, Frank, I had nothing. I had zero, no connections.
Yeah.
All the business came to me. I was in a corporate role. But when I got in B2B sales, that's where I really discovered the power of LinkedIn and just grew it organically over these years to where it's become something that's helped me set record sales in industries with no experience. It's got me speaking gigs and workshops. So that's my one thing I really excel at. I created kind of a system so that I can share with others on how to leverage LinkedIn, especially if you're in the B2B space, whether you're a business leader, owner, or sales leader, sales individual, professional. They can really use that platform effectively if they have kind of a proven process to do it. And that's my one. I do other things, but that's my one thing that I do, I think, exceptionally well. And
well,
so,
I mean, it lights you up.
Oh, it does. I get so excited talking about it, obviously, that I have to be careful to tone it down, because if somebody hates LinkedIn, I don't want to go on and on and on.
Well,
but for the ones who use it, enjoy it, and want to get more out of it, it's a wonderful platform.
Well, it's just not their thing, and that's
Right.
that's that. You know what, I don't like to go and sit in a hunting blind and shoot at ducks, right? I mean, it's I know
Not on
that's
top of my list either.
right, but there are people who truly enjoy that,
Oh,
and
they
it's
love
just
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and God love them. Excuse me. So I always think about that. Someone said that to me once. It's like, yeah, we all have different hopes and dreams and things we really want that really light us up.
Yep.
My wife loves accounting, right? You just, give her a financial statement that's $10 off and she'll figure it out and loves to figure it out. That's not me.
No.
Anyhow, people can get a hold of you at johndhanson.com.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes.
That's my personal website. Thank you. Yeah, that shows everything that I do, the books that I've written and the workshops that I do. If you want to learn kind of more about me and who I am, also, LinkedIn is a great place to go, because there's all kinds of content there. Obviously, my favorite platform. If you're on LinkedIn, let's connect, because I'd love to kind of learn what you're up to and how I can help. All kinds of great content in both places, but especially LinkedIn.
Sounds great. Appreciate you coming back one more time, maybe a third.
Definitely.
We'll
third time's the charm. It'll be even better the third time.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Well, you have a great day.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.